They said the plantation was quiet at night. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you feel like something is wrong. In the summer of 1847, deep in rural Georgia, behind white columns and polished doors, a secret was growing. Not whispered in town squares, not written in church records, a secret so disturbing that even the people who lived on that land avoided speaking its name. And when the truth finally surfaced, it did not sound like a scandal. It sounded like a curse. If stories that uncover the darkest corners of forgotten history pull you in, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Night Archive. This channel is where we uncover the stories that were buried on purpose. And trust me, this one was buried deep. The plantation stood miles from the nearest town. From a distance, it looked peaceful. A wide porch, tall oak trees, cotton fields stretching endlessly under the Georgia sun. Travelers passing by would have seen a respectable southern estate. Wealth, order, tradition. That is what the Whitmore family wanted the world to see. At the center of it all was Eleanor Whitmore. In public, she was known as a proper Southern lady, always dressed in pale silk gowns, gloves covering her hands, posture straight, voice soft but firm. Church on Sundays, charity drives during winter. Neighbors described her as composed, intelligent, and deeply devoted to family. But devotion can twist into something else when power and control become more important than humanity. Eleanor had been married young to Thomas Whitmore, a plantation owner nearly 20 years older than her. Their marriage was strategic, land merging with land, wealth protecting wealth. They had 2 sons together, Samuel and Henry. By 1847, both were young men, strong, obedient, and raised to believe the plantation was their birthright. Thomas Whitmore was often away handling trade and business. That left Eleanor managing the estate for long stretches of time. She oversaw the house staff, the kitchen, the gardens, and the enslaved workers in the fields. On paper, she was maintaining order. In reality, she was building something far darker. The demand for labor was rising. Cotton profits were unpredictable, and Eleanor began to view the enslaved people not as human beings, but as investments that could multiply. In her private letters, some later discovered decades after the Civil War, she wrote about expanding the household stock. Cold words, clinical words, but what she meant was breeding. At first, it seemed like she was simply arranging forced pairings between enslaved men and women, something tragically common on many plantations. She would select individuals based on strength, height, and health, as if she were studying livestock. Couples were assigned to cabins. Pregnancies were monitored. Children were counted not as babies, but as future profit. Yet over time, Eleanor's obsession escalated. She became convinced that the strongest bloodline on the plantation was her own family, S. In her mind, her sons represented physical strength, intelligence, and dominance. And slowly, quietly, she began to blur the lines that even other plantation owners would not cross. According to testimonies recorded years later during Reconstruction, Alina began forcing enslaved women into situations where they were made vulnerable around her sons. At first, it was framed as household assistants, serving meals, cleaning private quarters, but the assignments were deliberate. Samuel and Henry had been raised under strict control. They were taught that obedience to their mother was absolute. Alina's authority in that house was unquestioned, and in that isolation, miles from town, surrounded by land they believed they owned, her influence became law. One former enslaved woman, whose name was later recorded as Lisa, described Alina watching from the doorway as her sons entered the quarters at night. Lisa testified that Alina did not look away. She supervised, she calculated, she kept records of pregnancies, dates, names, physical traits of newborn children. The cruelty was systematic. When children were born, Alina would inspect them personally. If a baby appeared strong and healthy, she marked them in her ledger as viable. If a child was born sickly, the mother was punished for wasting resources. The language she used stripped away every trace of humanity. And yet, to the outside world, Alina Whitmore remained a model Southern lady. Church members dined at her table. Neighbors praised her hospitality. No one questioned why the number of children on the plantation was rising so quickly. Slavery itself created a system where no one wanted to look too closely. But secrets have weight. Samuel, the eldest son, began to change. Witnesses later said he grew distant and withdrawn. He drank heavily. He avoided eye contact. Whatever he had been raised to believe about power, something inside him was cracking. Henry, younger and more impressionable, followed his mother's commands with colder obedience. One night in late autumn, an incident shattered the fragile silence. An enslaved woman named Miriam attempted to run. She had given birth only months before. According to accounts, she told another woman that she would rather die in the woods than watch her child grow into the same nightmare. She was caught before she reached the edge of the property. Alina ordered punishment in front of others as a warning. But this time, something unexpected happened. Samuel refused to participate. He reportedly argued with his mother in the yard, his voice loud enough for workers in the field to hear. For the first time, the perfect image of the Whitmore family cracked in public view. Thomas Whitmore returned home shortly after that incident. What exactly he knew remains debated by historians. Some believe he was fully aware and allowed it for profit. Others suggest he had ignored signs out of convenience. But tensions inside the house escalated quickly. Within months, Samuel left the plantation entirely. Officially, he traveled north on business. Unofficially, some believe he fled. Henry remained, and Alina tightened her control. Then came the winter of 1848. Illness spread across the plantation. Close quarters and weakened bodies made disease inevitable. Several children died within weeks. Financial losses mounted. For the first time, Alina's system began to collapse under its own cruelty. Enslaved families, already traumatized, began resisting in subtle ways. Tools went missing. Harvest numbers dropped. Whispers traveled between cabins at night. The fear that had once kept everyone silent began turning into quiet defiance. In early 1849, a letter surfaced in town. It was unsigned. It described unnatural practices at the Whitmore estate. At first, local officials dismissed it, but rumors spread. Churches began distancing themselves. Social invitations slowed. Reputation was everything in the South's elite circles, and Alina's carefully crafted image started to unravel. Thomas Whitmore died suddenly that spring. Official records list fever as the cause, but speculation followed. Without him, Alina's protection weakened. Legal disputes over land ownership brought outsiders onto the property for evaluation. What they found disturbed even men accustomed to the brutal realities of slavery. Detailed ledgers, pregnancy records marked with initials, calculations predicting future yield from specific bloodlines. It was not just cruelty. It was obsession documented in ink. By the time the Civil War erupted in 1861, the Whitmore estate was already declining. Samuel never returned. Henry reportedly joined Confederate forces and died in battle. Alina lived long enough to see emancipation dismantle everything she believed she controlled. Formerly enslaved families left the land in 1865. Some changed their names. Some stayed in Georgia, but refused to speak about the plantation years. Trauma does not vanish with freedom. It lingers in silence. Alina Whitmore died in relative obscurity. No grand funeral, no glowing newspaper tributes, just a quiet burial on land that no longer obeyed her. History rarely records the full truth of plantations like Whitmore's. Many records were burned during the war. Others were hidden by families protecting their reputations. But fragments survived. Testimonies, letters, ledgers, enough to piece together a story that feels almost unbelievable. What makes this story chilling is not just the cruelty. It is the normalcy surrounding it. The dinners, the church services, the polite smiles. Evil did not arrive with chaos. It wore silk gloves and called itself tradition. When we talk about slavery, we often focus on laws and battles. But inside isolated estates across the South, power twisted into personal experiments. Control became obsession, and human lives were reduced to numbers in a book. That is why stories like this matter, because silence protects the wrong people. And at Night Archive, we refuse to let silence win. If this story shocked you, or if it made you think differently about how history hides its darkest corners, tell me in the comments. Do you believe Alina acted alone? Or do you think the community knew more than they admitted? I read your thoughts, and your discussions shape future stories. If you found this powerful, share it with someone who thinks they already know everything about American history. Sometimes the most important truths are the ones never taught in school. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Night Archive. There are more stories waiting, stories that were buried, denied, and almost erased. Because history is not just what was written, it is what was hidden. And sometimes, what was hidden is the most disturbing part of all.